The wild Mustang was dying on the road. Robert accelerated his BMW. Animal problems weren't his, but when he saw the mountains of Dream Valley in the distance, he slammed on the brakes. $10 million, he yelled to the orphan. 10 million if you save this horse. What happened next changed everything forever. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Do you believe money can buy redemption? The story starts now. Robert Harrison laid off 3 more employees at Monday's meeting. He didn't blink when his secretary of 20 years cried upon receiving the notice. He didn't pause when she pleaded, mentioning her young children. He just scribbled numbers on a spreadsheet as she left the room in sobs. At 62, the agribusiness magnate had built a $2 billion empire by treating people like numbers on a balance sheet. Feelings were a waste of time. Compassion didn't pay dividends. In his 2,000-square-foot office atop New York City's most expensive building, surrounded by priceless art and imported furniture, Robert lived alone in his fortress of marble and coldness. He had no wife. The last one had left 5 years earlier, tired of competing with spreadsheets for attention. He had no close children. His 2 heirs only called when they needed money. He had no true friends, only partners and subordinates who smiled out of obligation. His philosophy was simple: trust only yourself, because in the end, everyone disappoints. That day, he needed to travel to Dream Valley Ranch, his most remote property in rural Montana. A Chinese consortium was offering $800 million for the land, a deal he'd close by Friday. Robert avoided going there. There were memories in those mountains he preferred to keep buried. The armored BMW cut through the dirt road late in the afternoon. Robert drove impatiently, wanting to finish the inspection quickly. He was late because of a cancelled flight, irritated by the dust that soiled his $5,000 suit. In the passenger seat, Anna observed the landscape in silence. The 19-year-old orphan had worked on Robert's lands for 3 years. She had a strange reputation among the ranch hands. They said she charmed animals. Fierce cows would calm in her presence. Skittish horses ate from her hands. Nonsense, thought Robert. He'd only brought her because he needed someone who understood livestock for the appraisal. The brakes shrieked violently when they saw the obstacle on the road. A wild Mustang lay fallen in the middle of the road, its left front leg visibly broken. The animal was magnificent, even wounded, brilliant black coat, mane dancing in the afternoon wind, eyes still sparking with wild fury despite the pain. It must have been about 7 years old in its prime. Robert grumbled, irritated, already shifting gears to drive around the animal. It wasn't his problem. He had an important meeting, money to make, time to save. But when he raised his eyes to the mountains in the distance, those rocky peaks he'd known since childhood, something chilled his chest. Dream Valley, the same valley where... No, he wasn't going to think about that now. Anna had already gotten out of the car, cautiously approaching the Mustang. The animal tried to rise when it saw her, neighed loudly, but its broken leg made it collapse again. Sweat and foam beaded on its muzzle. In a few hours, it would be dead. "Get in the car!" Robert ordered, but his voice came out less firm than he expected. "It's not our problem." Anna looked at him, then at the dying horse. "Mr. Harrison." "Money doesn't grow on trees, girl. Get in." But Robert didn't accelerate. He stayed there, engine running, watching that wild animal that refused to give up, even when wounded. There was something familiar in those eyes, something that deeply bothered him, and he couldn't identify what it was. The offer came out of his mouth before he could think. $10 million. Anna blinked, confused. $10 million if you can save this horse and tame it. He didn't even know why he'd said it. Anna looked at Robert as if he'd gone mad. $10 million for a wounded wild horse, the most avaricious man she knew offering a fortune for an animal he'd wanted to ignore 5 minutes earlier. "Mr. Harrison, are you sure?" Robert didn't answer. He couldn't explain the impulse that had overcome him. He just watched Anna approach the Mustang again, this time with the small backpack she always carried. From inside, she took out makeshift bandages, a water bottle, crackers. The horse growled when she knelt beside it, but didn't try to bite her. Anna murmured low, soft words as she carefully examined the broken leg. The animal trembled, but allowed her to clean the wound and make a temporary bandage with the shirt she took from under her jacket. Robert got out of the car, intrigued despite himself. In 40 years in agribusiness, he'd never seen anything like it. The Mustang should have been attacking, biting, bucking. Instead, it accepted the care of a 19-year-old orphan, as if it understood she was its only chance of survival. "We need to take him to the ranch," Anna said without looking up. "Is there a vet there?" "Yes." Robert took out his phone, called the foreman. "Have Dr. Miller come now. Emergency. A wild horse." The trip to the ranch headquarters took 2 hours. Anna rode in the back of the pickup truck with the Mustang, sedated by emergency painkillers Robert always carried for his livestock. The vet was waiting for them in the makeshift corral hospital. Dr. Miller examined the animal carefully. Pure wild Mustang, never domesticated, about 7 years old, 8 at most. The fracture is serious but operable. It'll need weeks of recovery and, well, this kind of animal doesn't take to captivity easily, Robert. How much will it cost? The treatment? About $50,000. But Robert... The vet lowered his voice. "Why are you doing this? Since when do you care about injured animals?" Robert didn't know how to answer. He stood there watching Anna caress the sedated Mustang's muzzle, and once again felt that strange familiarity he couldn't identify. There was something about that place, that moment, that stirred memories buried for decades. "Anna," he finally said, "you have 1 month. If you can make this animal trust you and accept you as a partner, the $10 million are yours." She stared at him. "Why?" Robert didn't answer because he didn't know. He just turned his back and walked towards the main house. That night, alone in his New York City office, Robert tried to work but couldn't concentrate. All the spreadsheets reminded him of the same question. Why on earth had he offered $10 million for a wild horse? He picked up his phone 3 times to call Anna and cancel everything, but he always hung up before completing the call. On the 3rd attempt, he heard the secretary on the other end say that Anna was sleeping in the corral next to the Mustang, in case it needed anything during the night. Robert hung up the phone and looked out the window at the lights of New York City. For 15 years, he hadn't thought about Dream Valley with such intensity. For 15 years, he'd avoided going there, only selling livestock through intermediaries, hiring caretakers to look after the property. 15 years since. When Dr. Miller mentioned the Mustang's age, something clicked in his mind. 7 years. The horse was 7 years old. Robert did the math in his head, and his blood ran cold. Born 7 years ago, exactly when everything fell apart. Robert arrived at the ranch the next morning without warning. He found Anna in the corral, carefully brushing the Mustang, which was now awake and standing, bearing weight on its healthy leg. The animal accepted her care with a docility impossible for a wild horse. "How do you do that?" Robert asked, leaning on the fence. "I don't know how to explain it. Since I was little, animals, they trust me." Robert watched the scene for a few minutes. The Mustang had a peculiar mark, a small crescent-shaped scar on its forehead, half hidden by its mane. The more he looked, the more a strange feeling grew in his chest. "Anna, this horse, where exactly did you find him yesterday?" "On the old road that leads to the watering hole, near those big rocks." The watering hole. Robert felt the world spin. He hadn't been there in 15 years. 15 years since he'd stopped visiting the place where... "Mr. Harrison, are you all right?" He shook his head, trying to push away the memories. But they came in waves now, unstoppable. His father, John Harrison, taking him to that same watering hole when he was a child. The wild mustangs that came to drink water there every afternoon. The promise he'd made, "I need to go to town," he lied. "Take good care of him." Instead of going to town, Robert drove to the watering hole. The spot was exactly as he'd left it 15 years earlier. The same wooden bench his father had built, the same mountain view, the same peace that used to calm his soul before everything turned to greed and coldness. On the bench, he found something that made his legs tremble. An old leather notebook, protected by a plastic bag. He recognized the handwriting on the cover, "Mustang Diary, John Harrison." His father always noted when the wild horses appeared, how many there were, if there were new foals. He opened it to the last entry, dated 2 weeks before his father's death. March 15th, 2009. The Mustangs are returning to the watering hole after years of absence. A black mare is pregnant, should foal in April or May. Will Robert get to meet the foal when it's born? I still hope my son will return before I'm gone. The horses have always been our connection. Perhaps they'll be our salvation. Robert read the entry 3 times before fully understanding. 15 years ago, in 2009, he was at the peak of his ambition, expanding businesses, buying land, accumulating wealth. When his father fell ill, Robert was too busy to visit. When John died, Robert attended the funeral but left the same day, without even cleaning the house or taking care of his belongings. The Mustang Anna was caring for was approximately 7 years old. It was born in 2017, about 8 years after his father's death. Son or grandson of the horses John observed and protected. Robert flipped through the diary and found dozens of pages about the Mustangs. How his father left fresh water for them during droughts. How he'd built rustic shelters for the harsh winters. How he dreamed of showing that wildlife to the son who never visited anymore. My greatest regret is that Robert chose money over everything that truly matters. But if he ever comes back, the Mustangs will still be here. They are my last attempt to reconnect with my son. On the last page, a letter. Robert, if you're reading this, you've finally come back. The wild horses need protection. The land needs care. You need to remember who you were before you got lost in greed. I didn't give up on you. I never will. Robert closed the diary with trembling hands and cried for the first time in 15 years. Robert returned to the ranch with the diary clutched to his chest. He found Anna speaking softly to the Mustang, which now ate hay from her hand without hesitation. It was impossible to believe that this was the same fierce animal from the road. "Anna," he called, his voice softer than usual. "Can I ask you something?" She approached the fence. Robert held the diary, hesitant. Did you know my father took care of the wild horses here?" Anna shook her head. "Mr. Harrison died when I was 4, but the older ranch hands talk about him. They say he knew every wild horse in the valley by name." "He named them?" "He did, and he left instructions to keep putting fresh water in the watering hole, even after he was gone. You never knew that?" Robert felt his chest tighten. No, he didn't know because he'd never asked, because after his father's funeral he'd told the foreman to take care of everything without wanting details, because he was too busy building his empire to care about the last wishes of a man he considered too sentimental. "Anna, how old were you when you became an orphan?" 7. The same age as the Mustang. Robert swallowed hard. "And how did you end up here?" "Mr. Harrison found me in town, at the orphanage. He said every child needed to know animals, nature. He brought me here for vacation several times. When he died, his lawyer said I could stay, work on the ranch when I grew up. You signed the papers, but we never talked." Robert vaguely remembered signing documents about an orphan years ago, but he'd treated it as just another bureaucratic matter. That night, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. The Chinese consortium pressed for an answer. His partners wanted confirmation of the sale. $800 million at stake, and Robert couldn't make the decision. He was standing on the porch of the main house when he saw Anna leave the corral, walking slowly back to the staff quarters. She spent the whole night with the Mustang, only resting when she was sure it was well. Robert went down and found the animal standing, calmly chewing hay. The Mustang watched him without fear, but without intimacy. It was a respectful acceptance, as if it understood that this man was important to Anna. "You knew my father, didn't you?" Robert murmured. "He took care of your parents, your grandparents." The horse tilted its head as if listening. "I failed him. I failed completely." The phone vibrated in his pocket. It was Mr. Chen, from the Chinese consortium. "Robert, we need an answer by tomorrow. $800 million is our final offer. After that, we'll look for other lands." Robert looked at the Mustang, then at the mountains where his father used to walk every morning. "Mr. Chen, I need a few more days." "Days? Robert, this is business, not therapy. Yes or no?" Robert hung up the phone without answering. For the first time in 15 years, he didn't know if he wanted the money. For the first time in decades, something was worth more than profit. When Anna arrived at the corral the next morning, she found Robert sleeping against the fence, still wearing his wrinkled suit from the day before. His father's diary was open beside him, on the page where John had written about the foal that would be born. The Mustang was calmly grazing a few feet away from him, as if protecting his sleep. Robert woke up with Anna gently shaking his shoulder. The sun was already high, and his body ached from having spent the night leaning against the wooden fence. "Mr. Harrison, you shouldn't sleep out here." He stood up slowly, straightening his wrinkled suit. The Mustang watched him from a few feet away, naturally chewing grass. In 1 week, the animal's transformation was impressive, its legs still bandaged but already bearing weight, its eyes bright with recovered health. "Anna, I need to tell you something." In the next few minutes, Robert spoke about his father's diary, about the years of neglect, about how he'd discovered that John had cared for the Mustangs until he died. Anna listened in silence, caressing the horse's muzzle. "Your father taught me that animals feel when someone truly cares," she finally said. "They know the difference between those who care out of obligation and those who care out of love." Robert looked at the Mustang. The animal approached the fence and, for the first time, sniffed his outstretched hand. There was no fear, no aggression, just cautious curiosity. "What will you do with the money?" Robert asked. "The $10 million when you've completely tamed him." Anna shook her head. "I don't want the money, Mr. Harrison." "What do you mean?" "This horse doesn't need to be tamed. He needs to be respected, cared for, protected. Money doesn't do that." Robert felt something stir in his chest. A forgotten feeling, one he hadn't experienced since childhood. That afternoon, he received the call he'd been dreading. "Robert, the Chinese consortium has withdrawn its offer," his lawyer informed him. "They found land in Oklahoma for a better price. You lost $800 million by hesitating." He hung up the phone and stared at the screen. $800 million. Lost. Any sensible person would be desperate. But Robert felt only relief. In the following days, he started doing things he hadn't done in decades. He walked to the watering hole where his father used to meditate. He read every page of the diary, discovering a sensitive and wise man he'd never known how to appreciate. He talked to the old ranch hands, who told him stories about John that Robert had never heard. "Your father used to say you were just like him when you were young," said Old Man Dave, the foreman of 30 years. "Careful with animals, respectful of the land. He always believed that one day you'd return to being that way." Robert also started observing Anna with the Mustang. The connection between them grew daily, not dominance, but partnership. The horse followed Anna around the corral spontaneously, ate from her hands, allowed her to brush its mane. But it remained wild, free, only choosing to trust. A week later, Robert made the decision that would change everything. He called his lawyer and instructed the creation of a permanent sanctuary on the lands of Dream Valley. No sale, no development, just protection for the wild mustangs that still came to drink water at the watering hole. He called Mr. Chen and offered other properties at a better price than originally agreed. Mr. Chen accepted immediately, without suspecting that Robert had just saved what mattered most. And he called Anna. "The $10 million are still on the table, but not to tame the Mustang. For you to manage the sanctuary, to protect the wild horses as my father did." Anna cried when she understood what that meant. For the first time in 15 years, Robert felt he was honoring someone's memory instead of just accumulating profits from it. 2 years passed. Robert now divided his time between New York City and Dream Valley, spending half the week at the ranch. The sanctuary prospered under Anna's care, who was now 21 and had become a renowned expert in wild horses. The Mustang, which Anna had named John in honor of Robert's father, was completely healed. It remained wild, but chose to stay near the sanctuary, leading a small band of Mustangs that had discovered the safety of those lands. John was now 9 years old, in the prime of his strength and beauty. Robert watched the animal gallop freely through the valley every morning, and each time he better understood his father's passion for those creatures. There was something about the Mustang's freedom that healed a wound he didn't even know he carried. The sanctuary now cared for 23 wild horses. Some injured ones recovered and chose to stay. Others simply discovered that there they had fresh water, supplemental food in winter, and protection against hunters. Robert had transformed the main house into a small research center. He hosted vets, biologists, students interested in Mustang behavior. The property, which once only yielded profit, now yielded purpose. But the biggest transformation was in himself. "Mr. Harrison," Anna said one autumn morning, "there's a reporter wanting to do a story about the sanctuary." "No," he answered automatically. Robert still avoided publicity, preferring discreet work. "It's about John specifically. He's followed the Mustang since it was a foal. He wants to tell the story of its recovery." Robert stopped organizing the veterinary medicines and looked at Anna. "Since it was a foal?" "Yes. Dr. Peterson from the Wilderness Institute. He's been studying the Mustangs in this region for 15 years. He said he knew John's father." 15 years. Robert felt that familiar sensation of pieces falling into place. Dr. Peterson arrived the next afternoon, a 60-year-old man, gray-haired, kind eyes. He recognized Robert immediately. "You're John Harrison's son. My God, your father saved our research." "What do you mean?" 2008, 2009. The Mustangs in this region almost disappeared because of a severe drought. Your father was the only landowner who kept fresh water at the watering hole during the critical months. He saved 3 families of wild horses. Dr. Peterson showed old photos. Robert recognized his father in several of them, always accompanied by Mustangs, always smiling. "This here is John's father," said the researcher, pointing to a magnificent black stallion in a 2009 photo. "We called him King of the Valley. He died 5 years ago but left several offspring. John is the most like him." Robert looked at the photo for long minutes. His father caressing the King of the Valley's muzzle, the 2 old friends sharing a moment of peace. "Dr. Peterson, did my father talk about you?" "Talk? He called me every week, concerned about the Mustangs, wanting to know about research, sending donations to our foundation. Your father dreamed of bringing you to see our work." Robert closed his eyes. Another connection he lost, due to pride and haste. That night, alone with John in the corral, Robert spoke to the animal as if talking to his father. "He tried to teach me, didn't he, about what really matters. But I was deaf. Now I understand that you're not just a horse. You are his legacy, the last chance he gave me to learn to love something beyond money. John tilted his head, as if listening to every word. On the 3rd anniversary of John Harrison Sr.'s death, Robert organized a celebration at the sanctuary. Dr. Peterson and his team came, vets who collaborated with the project, local families who grew up hearing stories of the gentle man who cared for the Mustangs. Anna had prepared an exhibition with old photos, the diary preserved in a display case, and a mural showing the sanctuary's growth. 28 wild horses now called that valley home. Robert found John grazing near the watering hole, exactly where his father used to sit to observe the Mustangs. The animal, now 11 years old, showed the first signs of maturity. A few grey hairs in its mane, slightly more careful movements, but still magnificently wild and free. "John," Robert murmured, extending his hand. The Mustang approached and, as it had for months, allowed Robert to caress its muzzle. It was a privilege very few people received. During the celebration, Robert found himself observing the local children who came to visit the sanctuary. Their eyes gleamed at the sight of the free Mustangs, just as his must have gleamed as a child before he hardened his heart to the world. "Your father would be proud," said Dr. Peterson, approaching. "This place has become a national benchmark in Mustang preservation." "No, my father would be proud that I finally understood what he tried to teach." When everyone left, Robert and Anna remained alone with the horses. The sun set over the mountains, painting the valley gold. John galloped freely with his band, stopped atop a hill, and neighed, a sound that echoed through the mountains like a hymn of freedom. "Mr. Harrison," Anna said, "can I ask you something that's always puzzled me?" "Of course." "Why did you offer $10 million that first day? You weren't like that." Robert smiled, the first time he'd genuinely smiled in decades. "Because that place, that moment, for the first time in 15 years, I felt my father close to me, and I understood that some things are priceless. They have value." Anna nodded and walked back to the house. Robert remained alone in the corral, watching John rest near the other Mustangs. At 64, Robert finally understood the difference between cost and value, between owning and protecting, between dominating and respecting. The wild Mustang he'd saved on the road didn't need to be tamed. It needed to be free to choose to trust, just like people, just like himself. He took out his phone and did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He called his son in New York City. "Dad?" Chris answered, surprised. "Chris, would you like to come see something important here at the ranch?" There was silence on the other end. Then his son's voice softer. "What kind of important thing?" "The kind your grandfather always wanted to show you. The kind I never knew how to value. Until now." Robert hung up and looked at John once more. The Mustang watched him back, and for a moment it was as if the horse's eyes were his father's eyes, gentle, patient, full of a wisdom that money never buys. "Thank you," he whispered to the animal, "for teaching me that it's never too late to honor those we love." The night wind brought the distant whinny of other free Mustangs in the mountains. Robert smiled and walked home, knowing that he had finally found something worth more than $10 million, the peace of living with purpose. In the starry sky, he felt his father's presence approving every step of his journey back to what truly mattered. This story is about regret, about words we didn't say, calls we didn't make, people we left behind while pursuing things that don't matter. If you have someone you love but are distant from due to pride, anger, or being too busy, don't wait for a wild horse to teach you what truly matters. Call, write, show up, because unlike Robert, you still have time. And if this story reminded you of someone, or if you believe in second chances, share it. We never know who needs to hear this today. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.